All right, good afternoon, everybody. Peter Marzano back with my sixth album review, and the first time that I'll be looking at a pop album, taking a look at worldwide pop star and phenomenon Bruno Mars, who has fortunately since come out with some better music. But this will be taking a look at his debut album, Doo-Wops and Hooligans, released in October of 2010. This is actually the second album that I'll be reviewing from the year 2010. I did review Thank Me Later from Drake as my first review on this part of the channel, but certainly a bit to unpack here. Bruno Mars gained a lot of his popularity coming up on the scene before this album, was featured in a couple of songs that hit the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, most notably Nothing on You, where he was featured on a B.O.B track, and then Billionaire, where he was featured with Travie McCoy of the Gym Class Heroes on that track. And now he releases a full-length pop album that really doesn't differ a whole lot from one end to the other, although there are certainly some things on here that are worth being celebrated, I should say. So basically, start unpacking it and getting into it. He opens the album with what was one of his most popular singles that he has released still to this point throughout his career, in Grenade, one of the album's successful singles, describing this uneven relationship that has Bruno Mars giving a lot more than he is receiving. Just kind of a pretty basic concept there, and there certainly are some cheesy lyrics throughout, but this is a song that I thought was one of the more well vocally performed songs on the album. And I actually think that that's probably the most consistent characteristic throughout the LP, is that Bruno Mars is an incredibly skilled vocalist, and I think that he really puts that on display on most of the tracks on this album, at least at some point in the songs. But it's very consistent throughout the Grenade track. All of the songs on this album are produced by the Smeezingtons, who are not active in music anymore, but they did also produce Nothing on You, the song that kind of put Bruno on the map. And the song throughout is very easy to follow. There's a climactic final chorus, which is kind of a format that's seen in a lot of pop songs and is also utilized in this one here. But I definitely liked the track and thought it was one of the stronger ones on the album. That is then followed up with what has become certainly one of his most successful songs ever, Just the Way You Are, which is played in grocery stores across the country today to this day. It's a very straightforward love ballad, not a whole lot of lyrics there, up to interpretation, extremely commercially successful, and I think it's also aged very well as a pop song, still finds its way onto pop radio stations to this day, nearly 8 years later. I also can't imagine how many weddings that this song has been played at. But I do enjoy the track as well, just basically talking about his admiration for the love of his life. There's a pretty predictable stripped down piano ending. There's solid production. You hear these light bells in the background towards the end. And I actually think that this is probably overall the album's best track, or at the very least one of them. And at this point, especially during my first listen of it, I was pretty encouraged and hopeful about what Bruno was going to bring to the table for the rest of the album, especially because I do enjoy a lot of the work that Bruno Mars has come out with since, quite a bit. So I was hoping that maybe going back to this album that there would be some more hits than misses. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, because he follows that up with what I think is the worst track on the album by quite a bit, Our First Time, which was really just a cringe sandwich throughout. It has this retro kind of Latin sounding blend to start the song, and it's very blatantly about having sex for the first time with his partner. With the cringy lyrics throughout the song, I just couldn't do. Don't you worry about a thing, babe, just go with it. And the line, just go with it, repeating again and again, is not really something that I feel comfortable, and that's me, a white dude, saying that, comfortable listening to in a song that's about having sex. It's just kind of not easy to listen to. It's very cringy. There's another line where he says, no clothes are required, which opens up the second verse, or the closing line to that verse where he says, ooh, girl, you're so delicious, like ice cream on a sunny day, gonna eat you before you melt away, which was really quite the drastic departure from the very lighthearted and sincere love ballad that you heard on just the track before. And this actually also ended up being the longest track on the album. And on an album that's 35 minutes long, you really don't want to make what is probably the worst song on the album the longest one as well. So I just really did not enjoy that track. And it's really quite the lyrical departure from what Bruno Mars had in the first two songs, which were very sincere, powerful, well performed love ballads. And then this one, I also don't even think is quite as vocally well performed either. That one is followed up by the song Runaway Baby, which instrumentally I actually enjoyed quite a bit. It has this very energetic opening. It's almost Lenny Kravitz sounding. It's probably the most upbeat song on the album, definitely to that point. And I do think that the instrumentation really complements Bruno's powerful voice throughout. There's these late 60s bubblegum pop flavors that you hear, and it has a very catchy guitar riff towards the end of the song. But the song itself is about Bruno not wanting more than one night with a romantic partner, and that she should run away, baby, if she's expecting more. And I think that that's a very interesting follow-up, not just to the first two tracks, but to the last track, to where he was really, really trying to get his partner to have sex with him. So I almost found that to be quite comical, and I don't know if that was explicitly intended when making this album. And I also don't think that this album really has a cohesive concept to it. But I mean, those first four songs in that order is a bit questionable. I almost would have preferred if Just the Way You Are was the opener, if Grenade came afterwards, if Our First Time wasn't on the album at all. And I do like a lot of things about Runaway Baby, but just the flow of the album made it sound very. I mean, Bruno's all over the place with his love life on this album. And then he follows that up with the commercially successful song, The Lazy Song, which once again, instrumentally is very lighthearted. I definitely enjoyed that part of it. There's this repeating ukulele riff, and it's basically a song about doing nothing, about just wanting to sit around all day, that maybe he'll be accomplishing a lot tomorrow. There's also a very quick and early masturbation reference start away that he was going to throw his hands in his pants, which once again, in relation to the tracks that came prior to that, I found to be quite humorous. But as well as much as the concept of the song is really pretty lighthearted and shallow, I actually thought it was very well performed vocally, and that he was returning to that as well. And like I said earlier on, that's something that on this album and in Bruno's work in general that I've enjoyed a lot. The follow-up to that track is Marry You, another song that was released as a single off of the album. And it's about an impulsive marriage, presumably in the city of Las Vegas. There's these repeating church bells that go on in the background, very lighthearted and upbeat production once again. But once again, it leads me to be confused by Bruno kind of covering all of the bases of relationships, from Grenade being this very tumultuous and difficult relationship where he's giving in a lot, not getting a lot back. And then the next song, And Just the Way You Are, talking about the love of his life and how she means absolutely everything to him, to talking about trying to get his partner to have sex with him for the first time, to talking about not wanting any more than a one-night stand. I mean, he's really touching all of the bases as far as romanticism goes. So I definitely found that to be pretty interesting and definitely confusing as far as the flow of the album goes. I feel like there could have been a better way to organize the track list to maybe implement some cohesion in that regard. But I just did not enjoy the Marry You track, especially because the repeated refrain, just the don't say no, 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 just say yeah, 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 and we'll go, 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 go. If you're ready, like I'm ready. And then that repeats 3 times throughout the track. And I feel like that's also been something that was noticed in the songs before this on the album, to where the verses are maybe 4 to 6 bars long, and then there's a pretty generic bridge. It's very formulaic, but it also doesn't really delve into what he's trying to talk about that much. And fortunately, I think that that's something that Bruno really improved on later on in his career, but it certainly was not seen on the majority of this album. And I thought that that track was particularly weak and not really one that overall is enjoyable to listen to. The song after that is Talking to the Moon, which is one that I enjoyed definitely a bit more. It starts as a slower piano ballad chronicling a long distance relationship. He feels like he's talking to the moon because she's not by his side. So it's more of a sincere concept, which kind of fits with the first couple of songs on the album. It also has this early 2000s flavor with the production stripped down to start, and then it adds in the drums at the second verse to go with the piano. Instrumentally, it almost sounds similar to the structure of Beautiful by Christina Aguilera, which was a track released in the early 2000s that I actually enjoy quite a bit. It's very lyrically simple once again, but it does fit Bruno's voice well. The subject matter and the production definitely fits his voice, and it certainly breaks kind of the weak streak that the album was on at that point. But then the song Liquor Store Blues follows that up, and this is just a song that blatantly does not belong on the album. There's this out of place Damian Marley feature. He says a few ad lib lines to open the track, and then he has a third verse, and it's just this very generic reggae instrumental, like it was something to where it's like he purchased a random beat that was like generic reggae beat 1 or generic reggae beat 2. There's these reverb vocals throughout, and it also doesn't fit the idea of the person that you have in your mind of Bruno Mars. It's an ode to drinking away his sorrows, and I do think that the song tried a bit too hard to be explicitly reggae, and then the Damian Marley verse comes in and doesn't really add anything to the song at all besides convincing the audience that it is indeed a reggae song. And I just really didn't enjoy the track at all, especially because thematically it's just really, really like not in place from what the rest of the album is. And while I would have liked to see Bruno Mars kind of explore some different lyrical concepts on this album, this was one that had really no relation to him, at least to our knowledge at this point in time. And it definitely didn't fit the general theme of the album. And I'm not saying that I would have preferred another generic love song here instead, but this is a song that I felt was probably the most out of place on the entire album, considering the flow of how the rest of it goes. The track after that was one that was heard in many commercials and was the final single released off of the album, Count on Me, which is this light, stripped down Latin instrumentation. Once again, a repeating ukulele riff throughout. Very lighthearted, but extremely lyrically simple and very predictable. And while it's a song that's probably the easiest on the album to sing along with and is easy to play anywhere you go, there's very little personal flair to the song. It's just very generic. Something that sounds like it could have been written by anybody. I think Bruno Mars performs it well, but that's really around it. It doesn't really have any qualities that would drive me to seek that song out and listen to it again. Fortunately for Mars, I think the final song in the album is also perhaps the strongest on the entire album. It's also the only one that has features, and I think that that's something, especially because that is how Bruno Mars kind of got popular in the first place, was being featured on other tracks. There's a Cee-Lo Green and B.O.B feature, and I really, really dig the final track on this album, The Other Side. It's very instrumentally similar to a lot of the pop released in that 2008 to 2011 time range. It has this very powerful and energetic chorus. It's a fitting closer for the album overall. The Cee-Lo Green feature is really solid, and then he sings the second chorus in the song. And the B.O.B verse isn't really bad either, and he's somebody that releases plenty of cringy material to write home about as well. But I think that it would have been more tracks like this that would have given this album more cohesion. It would have made it easy to listen to, because for a 35-minute album, you just kind of feel like you're hearing the same thing over and over again, just from a vaguely different standpoint of Bruno Mars trying to fit himself into all of these different romantic situations, even though the songs kind of all sound the same on here. But The Other Side is the one song that's like a legitimate departure from that. It's lyrically about him, Cee-Lo Green, and B.O.B all living completely different lives. That they all want to reunite at some point. I really, really like the production to that song. I thought it was a good closer to the album, and I also think it kind of initiates the flavor that he took on his sophomore LP, Unorthodox Jukebox, which I definitely enjoyed quite a bit more than this one. But for this album, despite starting off fairly strong with those 2 singles, I really just didn't enjoy a whole lot of the rest of it. I thought it was quite generic throughout, and outside of Bruno Mars's outstanding vocal performance that he has been known to deliver throughout his musical career, this album doesn't really offer anything to write home about, other than the fact that they're pretty generic pop songs that have very little personal inflection into them. And to me, I just couldn't really have that much of an interest in seeking this album out and listening to it again. And I'm somebody that enjoys Bruno Mars's music, but especially since then, with him releasing 2 other albums that definitely have a lot more to offer in that regard, this one just really doesn't do it for me. I do think that it certainly has its moments. Like I said, I like the first 2 tracks. I like the closer. But other than that, it's certainly a mixed bag with more misses and hits, which leads me to say I'm giving this one a 48 out of 100. Thank you for tuning in. If you thought anything different of the album, let me know in the comments. I'll certainly come back with another album review quite shortly. But this has been Peter Marzano taking a look at Doo-Wops and Hooligans by Bruno Mars, and we'll see you next time.